For 25 years, researchers at Northwestern Medicine have been studying a small, remarkable group of people. All of them are over 80 years old, and all of them have something in common that shouldn't be possible. According to everything we thought we knew about aging, their memory performs as well as someone in their 50s. Researchers call them superagers. And the fascinating part isn't just that they exist, it's that scientists have identified a specific, simple memory test that reliably separates superagers from typical older adults. It's not an MRI. It's not a blood test. It's a short list of words and whether you can recall them a few minutes later. Today, we're going to walk through what this research actually found, what the test measures, why some brains seem to resist the aging process almost entirely, and what the current science says about whether this is something you're simply born with or something you can influence. Let's get into it. Here's how researchers define a superager. It's an adult 80 years or older whose episodic memory, the kind of memory that lets you recall specific personal experiences, performs as well as a typical person in their 50s or 60s, 2 to 3 decades younger. The specific test used across this research is a delayed word recall task. A researcher reads a list of 15 words aloud. After a delay, filled with other tasks so you can't just keep repeating the words in your head, you're asked to recall as many of the original words as you can without being shown the list again. According to the Northwestern research, superagers typically recall 9 or more of the 15 words after the delay, a score on par with people 30 years younger. Typical older adults, by comparison, tend to recall meaningfully fewer. Here's what makes this especially interesting. When researchers looked inside the brains of confirmed superagers using MRI scans, and later in donated brain tissue after death, they found their brains were shrinking far more slowly than their peers. In a landmark study published in JAMA, superagers showed a rate of brain atrophy dramatically slower than typical aging adults, more comparable to healthy adults decades younger. Even more striking, when researchers examined 77 donated superager brains, some contained the amyloid and tau proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease, the same plaques and tangles seen in dementia patients. Yet these superagers had shown no memory decline in life at all. Lead researcher Dr. Emily Rogalski and colleagues described two distinct patterns. Some superagers simply don't develop these harmful proteins at all, a pattern of resistance. Others develop them just like everyone else, but their brains appear able to function normally despite them, a pattern researchers call resilience. So what predicts who becomes a superager? This is where the research gets most useful for the rest of us, because several patterns have shown up consistently across studies. Social connection appears repeatedly in this research. Multiple studies from the Superaging Research Initiative, a multi-site research collaboration studying this group across the US and Canada, have found that superagers tend to report stronger interpersonal relationships and greater social engagement than typical aging peers. One widely cited superager participant, profiled in the Northwestern research, was specifically noted for staying an engaged, active conversationalist with his grandchildren, deliberately keeping up with topics and culture well outside his own generation. Physical movement speed is another factor that stood out. Research from the Vallecas Project, a long-running Spanish cohort studying superagers, found that faster movement speed, not necessarily more frequent exercise, but the actual speed and efficiency of physical movement, was one of the strongest differentiating factors between superagers and typical older adults, identified through a machine learning analysis of 89 different demographic, lifestyle, and clinical variables. Better mental health and emotional well-being also showed up as a distinguishing factor in that same research. This doesn't mean superagers never experience stress or hardship. It means that, on average, they reported better emotional health scores than their typical aging peers. And in brain imaging research, superagers were found to have better preserved white matter, the brain's internal wiring that allows different regions to communicate quickly and efficiently, with slower deterioration of these structural pathways over repeated yearly scans compared to typical older adults. This is the most important and most honestly uncertain part of the story. Researchers do not yet know for certain how much of the superager pattern is something people are born with versus something shaped by lifestyle and life circumstances. What the research does show is correlation, not proof of cause. Superagers tend to have stronger social ties, faster movement, and better emotional health. But that doesn't prove that building those things later in life will turn a typical aging brain into a superager brain. It's possible some of these traits are markers of an underlying resistant biology rather than things that create it. That said, researchers studying this, including the Superaging Research Initiative specifically, believe this line of work opens the door to new interventions aimed at preserving brain health, in the words of the Northwestern team. And continued research is actively trying to determine which of these factors, if any, can be intentionally built or strengthened. The honest current answer is we don't yet know how to manufacture a superager, but we do know what superagers tend to have in common, and staying socially engaged, physically active, and emotionally healthy are worthwhile goals for brain health, regardless of whether they alone can recreate this specific phenomenon. We want to be straightforward about something most videos in this space skip over. Superagers are, by definition, a small, unusual group. This is not the typical trajectory of aging, and most people, even those who live very healthy lives, will experience some normal degree of memory change with age. This research studies an exception, not a blueprint everyone can follow to the same outcome. The delayed word recall test described in this video is also not something you should use to diagnose yourself or anyone else. Real cognitive assessment involves trained clinicians, standardized conditions, and multiple tests together, not a single word list exercise watched in a video. Doing well on an informal version of this test at home is interesting and encouraging, but it is not a clinical result. And doing poorly on an informal attempt does not mean something is wrong. The honest summary is this: superagers are a real, well-documented, and genuinely remarkable phenomenon studied by serious researchers over 25 years. The traits associated with superaging, social connection, movement speed, emotional health, are worth pursuing for their own well-established benefits. But turning any one person into a superager through lifestyle change alone has not been proven, and the researchers themselves are still working to understand exactly how much of this can be influenced. So here's what the superager research tells us. A small group of people over 80 have memory that performs like someone 30 years younger. Their brains show remarkably slow aging on MRI scans, and whether by resistance to harmful proteins or resilience despite them, they hold on to their cognitive sharpness in a way that challenges what we assumed was inevitable about growing older. What predicts this pattern, as far as research has found so far, includes strong social relationships, faster physical movement, and better emotional health. 3 things worth nurturing regardless of whether they alone can make you a superager. And one more time, because it matters, if you or someone you love has genuine concerns about memory or thinking, please talk to a doctor for real assessment. This video is education, not diagnosis. If this kind of research-backed breakdown is useful to you, consider subscribing. We go through published studies like this every week, always with sources, always without hype. And if you know someone in their 70s or 80s who's sharp as a tack and always the first to remember every name at a family gathering, this might be the video worth sending them today.